Let's talk about structure decks. Structure decks, or even starter decks in any TCG, have always been one of, if not the best entry points to getting into any TCG. Structure decks offer a very simple way of hopping straight into the game at a very cheap entry point and offer some great staple cards to get you set off on the right foot. But beyond that too, structure decks are great buys in general for getting your collection up and are great entry points for budget players to get into competitive gaming and allow for budget players to comfortably hop into competitive at a good entry level without having to skip their next rent. They can also help to make a meta more dynamic, as sometimes older archetypes can be revived and strengthened in a way that makes them more viable than they previously would have been without the support. And lastly, structure decks can sometimes offer up some great reprints which can be worth the price of the entire deck by itself. The idea of a structure or starter deck is to pick one up and then upgrade it with cards from your main core and side booster sets. Now, Yu-Gi-Oh aside for now, I want to talk about a few games that I feel do all or some of these things in a great way. But first, we have to define what makes a good structured deck. What's goody with you all today? My name is RayGVT, and today I want to talk about structure decks and starter decks, what they do well and what they could stand to do a little bit better, and look at some examples across some games that display these things really well or really poorly. Let's get started. To me, a good structure deck is almost everything that I just mentioned above, but is mainly these three things in particular. 1. They have to be cheap enough for anyone to be able to purchase at entry-level prices. 2. Introduce new and interesting strategies or boost existing strategies in a powerful way. And 3. Offer up some good or much-needed card reprints. So to begin with, I want to start by talking about a card game that I feel does this really well. The Digimon TCG is a game that I fell in love with a long time ago and is a game that I feel does all of the above correctly. Currently, at the time of making this video, the Digimon card game has a total of 14 starter decks, but let's rewind to a while back when the game was still considered relatively new. To begin with, the Digimon card game offered up 6 different starter decks, one deck representing each color and style in the game: red, blue, yellow, green, black, and purple. Now, putting aside the fact that these decks aren't the most viable to grab when wanting to jump into the metagame for the first time today, and the fact that they can be kinda hard to find sometimes, I want to look at what they offer up in relation to what I want to talk about. To put it simply, these starter decks were cheap and made the game plans of each color and strategy very easy to understand. Example, red is your powerhouse aggro style, blue is your memory control, and purple is for those that really like to maximize on how much brain power they use. Even in every starter deck after these initial 6, the strategy is made clear on how you want to be playing these decks, but leaves plenty of room for you to experiment. For example, again, the Gallantmon and O-Force Vidramon decks that followed after these are clear on how you should play them, but with all the added support that these archetypes continue to receive well after their initial release, you have plenty of ways to really make your decks that much more different from the next person. Red as a color is the aggressive, all-in type of style, and Gallantmon as an archetype allows you to do just that by going all in, focusing on high DP and removal effects for that clear swing. Let's look at another example with blue. Probably my favorite starter deck in this game, right next to the Gallantmon deck, is the blue Ancient Dragon deck, focusing on keeping up your memory count to Jogress into Pyudramon, and then build up to your big boy Imperial. This deck, to this day, is still very relevant because of just how strong Imperialdramon and its strategy is. And following after this, we were given the Jesmon and Ragnarlordmon starters. Now, these two decks, in my opinion, are perfect examples of boosting already existing strategies in a powerful way. Previously, Jesmon as an archetype was a bit weird. Don't get me wrong, he was powerful. Bro was a tier 1 deck back in his heydays of BT 6 and 7, but very problematic if you didn't play your cards right and would kind of punish you for it. So previously, Jesmon was considered one of the best decks, doing everything a red deck should, capable of reaching high DPs, able to wipe boards, and was just really strong. The problem? This deck was infamous for bricking almost always, again, if you didn't set up correctly. So, what do they do when giving him his own starter deck? They increase the deck's consistency by giving it better and higher search power, some really key and powerful Digimon and option cards, while improving on his existing game plan from before, rather than reworking the whole thing. On top of this, taking a look outside of the starter deck, they supported him even further by giving him some really powerful new boss cards to build into that just drove the strategy home. And this is another thing that I feel is really important to good starter decks and structure decks, making them relevant to the current meta and also continuing to support them. Now when I look at Yu-Gi-Oh for this, it's something that can be a little bit up or down. I look at decks like the Albaz Strike structure deck, and when it came out, and it was nearly perfect because it's an already powerful archetype in the game and only takes a little bit of extra reworking to make it top tier. But then I look at decks like the Cyber Strike structure deck and the time around when it released, and I'm just asking, why? We'll come back to this though. I look at Digimon and it always seems to make sense. When the Imperial deck came out, BT8 was the most recent booster, and Meta, which boosted Imperial's power through some really good support. When the Jesmon and Ragnar decks came out, BT10 was out, which gave Jesmon some additional and powerful support, same with Ragnar Lordmon. It's relevant to the current meta at the time. Call this the secret fourth element. Lastly, I want to take a look at the most recent starter deck currently out at the time of this video, and that's the Advanced deck set featuring Beelzemon and Beelstarmon. This deck is arguably the best deck set that has been printed so far in the game of Digimon, and perfectly captures all of the elements that we've talked about already. While the starting price is just a little bit higher than your average deck set, it introduces and improves on an existing strategy and is very relevant to its current meta at the time. Going back to that price thing real quick, the reason the deck is set at a higher price than all of the other ones that came before it is because this deck throws in some extra things that helps out a lot. For starters, it comes with a set of 10 extra side cards, as well as comes with a full set of sleeves, something that I've been wanting Yu-Gi-Oh to do for years now. All of this on top of all of the regular things a standard Digi deck comes with, now including a full playmat. It's a paper playmat, but hey, hats off to them for including a basic starter package. This deck comes tournament ready and is easy to build up on with new and existing cards from the main booster sets. Now, some of you can say that I'm kind of cheating with using this as the structure deck or starter deck to compare other games to, but the point that I'm trying to make here is that this is what a structure deck should be by default. Heck, even most of the Pokemon TCGs do all of these things pretty well, and they pack a lot of things for the beginner. Now, let's flip it back to home base and look at Yu-Gi-Oh! Historically, Yu-Gi-Oh! Structures and starters have always been very hit or miss. Now, let me start off by saying that currently we have some of the best structure decks ever printed in the game. Decks like the current Beware of the Trap Trick structure and the aforementioned Albaz Strike structure are easily the best structures that we've ever received in the game, hands down. Recent structures have been giving us some amazing and much needed reprints of key cards like the obvious Ash Blossoms, and some super powerful cards like Evenly Matched in the most recent Trap Tricks deck, which is a key meta card. And while some other structure decks like the Crystal Beast deck haven't been on the greatest hits list, they still offer ways to play an archetype that was almost not worth it into one that's now very interesting to play around with the new support that it received. I stand by the statement that we are currently in the best time for Yu-Gi-Oh! Structures that we have been in a very long time. But it didn't always used to be like this. There was a time not too long ago even when almost every structure that we would receive was extremely subpar and pretty underwhelming, not being able to offer up nearly any of the key points that we've discussed so far outside of the cheap price. But even that was kinda, and still is, a problem. Let's start with that. See, whereas most other TCGs currently on the market can get you going with 1 or 2 copies of the structure or starter decks, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game that has always needed you to buy 3 copies of a single structure if you want to maximize the strategy as much as you can. The idea of doing this is so that you can maximize on the number of key cards and staples that you get, so that if you're playing these decks straight out of the box, you can be playing it at its best. Where most other card games currently on the market allow you to have up to 4 copies of a single card in the deck, this is helped by the starter decks already including 2 copies or the full playset of 4. Yu-Gi-Oh! On the other side only allows up to 3 copies of a single card in your deck, not taking the forbidden and limited list into mind. Now obviously this makes sense because different card games are structured differently. Most other card games allow for bigger deck sizes of up to 50 cards or more, whereas Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a 40 to 60 card game. It makes sense for these structure decks to include multiple copies of key cards because of how much bigger the deck sizes allow. But even still, what's Yu-Gi-Oh!'s excuse? For a really long time now, you've only ever received one copy of a single given card. You playing Cyber Dragons? You're gonna need the Cyber Dragon cores. What's that? You only get one copy per deck? Well, then you better pick up another one. And another one! Again, it does make sense within the context of the game itself with the smaller deck size limit and with Yu-Gi-Oh! Already being a game with a high ceiling. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh! Could do a little bit better by including multiple copies of key cards that they know we absolutely need. Even just the simple ones like the aforementioned Cyber Dragon Core example. And yes, before anyone mentions it, I know you can just buy singles, but I'm approaching this from an entry-level new player type situation. And you know the whole scenario of, oh no, I left my deck at home. What's the best structure deck to buy? I'll just get 3 of those for now. Next, I want to talk about point number 2, and that's introducing new and interesting strategies or boosting existing strategies in a powerful way. Now, this is a very simple point that I feel most games do pretty well most of the time. Now, usually it's up to the main booster sets and side booster sets to introduce new archetypes, typings, and strategies, and then it's usually the job of the structure decks to boost these archetypes and strategies later. I feel like this is pretty standard and is done pretty well. So where the failure usually can be is when a structured deck just feels like nothing happened. Like, you ever look at one and ask, why do you exist? This has happened several times in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where it's just like, what's going on? What happened here? There was a period in Yu-Gi-Oh! Around 2020 to 2021 when it felt like every structured deck after Mechanized Madness was just so bad. Sacred Beasts, Spirit Charmers, Freezing Chains, and both God structures and Cyber Strike to an extent were all so underwhelming. And as the best Ice Barrier player on the planet, even I have to say that this structured deck deserved so much better, man. It hurts. None of these were helpful for getting into competitive, and none of them really had a big impact on the game the same way the other ones that came before did. And I get it, it's not always about competitive, but even for casuals trying to jump in, they kinda deserve better if they hope to stick with the game. So on that note, let's flip it around. Ever since 2022 and with the release of the Albaz Strike structure deck, we've been getting some pretty great ones. Except for you. Why do you need to exist again? Seriously, I don't know why this of all things needed a reprint. Crystal Beast and Dark World all got some nice revamps, and we've seen both of these decks compete in the meta, which is so cool. The amount of Dark World representation I've seen is actually so cool. And the Trap Trick structure kinda just takes it to a whole other level. People are literally making meta builds to compete toe-to-toe with some of the most powerful decks in the game. This is what I'm talking about. I feel like Konami has decided to switch on again in this area. I just hope they stay switched on. Please don't fumble this again. Don't send us into another dark age of mid-structured decks. Oh my gosh, is that Jack out? And lastly, let's talk about reprints. Part of the job of a structured deck is to give us some decent reprints. Whether it's staples or cards that just haven't seen the light of day since release, this can be a really good thing for all players. Having easy access to key cards is all a TCG player wants. I'm gonna use the obvious Ash Blossom reprint example here, but for real, this is a great example of a card that was held so highly and was and still is a very key and necessary card to own, but it kept getting reprinted in sets that became increasingly hard to find very shortly after they would release. And when both Dual Power and Dual Devastator came around, the same thing happened, at least where I am anyway. So when it was shown that it was getting a reprint in the Soul Burner structure deck, which to this day I still regret that I couldn't get, it was a big deal. However, even after that, the card's cost was still way too high, but Konami would reprint it again in 2020's Maximum Gold set. Keep in mind that this is now 3 years after its original release in Maximum Crisis. It would also get another reprint in that year's Megatins, which bumped its price down a little more. And now this card has been reprinted twice in 2 structure decks in the last year. This is a good thing, and that's the point that I'm trying to make. Continue to include reprints of these cards that you know people need. On top of this too, it helps with people looking for that entry level into the more competitive side of the game, because you're starting them off on the right foot by including a key card to the meta. And yes, while you do need to do more than just add 3 copies of Ash to a deck to make it really shine, it really helps to have this. Even with the Cyber Strike structure, as mid as it was, included a reprint of Infinite Impermanence, another card that followed a similar path to Ash Blossom. And now with decks like the Trap Trick structure getting things like Evenly Matched, a powerhouse card in the meta, I think we're on the right track. So to conclude, what makes a good structure or starter deck? 1. They have to be cheap enough for anyone to be able to purchase at entry-level prices. 2. Introduce new and interesting strategies or boost existing strategies in a powerful way. And 3. Offer up some good or much needed card reprints. And the secret 4th element, they have to be relevant to their current meta, and it helps if they continue to be supported after their initial release too. One final thing that I want to mention is that structured decks should also include all of the basics for a beginner to be able to hop into the game for the first time without much issue. It would be cool if beyond just the rulebook, we could get stuff like sleeves or an actual playmat. Like the good ones. I know that this would drive up the price of them even more, but I think if these basics were included, it would definitely incentivize more people to buy them and be more interested. I'm definitely looking directly at Yu-Gi-Oh when I say this. If Digimon has shown anything, it's that this is absolutely possible. But I don't know, what do you guys think? Structured decks are integral to any game and are a huge key in getting new players into the game or keeping existing players staying in the game. I feel like they're done pretty well across the board when I look at the main TCGs out there. In the case of Yu-Gi-Oh, I think they've been doing really well, and again, I just hope they keep up this energy for future structures. You've been doing something good, Konami. Don't mess this up. I don't know why I decided to make a video specifically on this topic, but I hope you guys found it useful in some way. What are some of your favorite structured decks out there, whether in Yu-Gi-Oh or any other card game, and what are some games that you feel do this very, very well? Let me know. Now, if you excuse me, I don't have access to my locals deck right now for next week, so I need to go figure out what I'm gonna build. I'll see you guys in the duel arena.